Hello and welcome. The story of Oklahoma isn't just a straight line on a timeline. It's really a series of powerful, often violent collisions. It's where ancient cultures run headlong into European explorers, where entire nations were forcibly pushed together, and where a frantic, chaotic race for land reshaped a territory literally overnight. It's a story of black gold erupting from the earth, bringing both incredible wealth and just profound tragedy. So let's dive into how these collisions forge the Oklahoma we know today. This right here, this is the big question we're tackling. Oklahoma's origin story is frankly like no other in the country. It was born from broken promises, built in a day through sheer chaos, and marked by immense tragedy. So how does a place like that become the state it is today? All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the ancient land and its first peoples. Then we'll get into the creation of Indian territory, the absolute madness of the land runs, and the political battles that led to statehood. And from there, we'll look at the extreme highs and lows of oil, dust, and tragedy, and finally, how the modern Sooner state has reinvented itself. To really get Oklahoma, you have to go back. I mean, way, way back. Long before it was even a concept on a map, this piece of land was a crossroads, a place of constant movement, culture, and conflict. Just look at this timeline. The depth of history here is staggering. We're talking about people living here 11,000 years ago. Later, you have these incredibly sophisticated societies, like the Caddoan Mississippians, who built these amazing centers like the Spiro Mounds. For centuries, this was a vibrant, thriving homeland for native cultures. And then, the collisions begin. First, the Spanish show up. Then France claims it all. And finally, in 1803, the whole thing gets sold to the United States in the Louisiana Purchase. So the 19th century, this is where we see the most defining and frankly, the most tragic collision in Oklahoma's history. The U.S. government didn't see this land for its own citizens to settle. No, they saw it as a destination, a place to forcibly remove tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral homes in the South. And the legal tool they used to do this? The Indian Removal Act of 1830. Now, on paper, it sounds almost like a business deal, authorizing an exchange of land. But in reality, it was a brutal, uncompromising policy of displacement. For the tribes who, understandably, resisted leaving the lands they'd lived on for generations, well, this removal was anything but peaceful. This policy was aimed squarely at 5 major southeastern nations: the Choctaw, Seminole, Creek, Chickasaw, and Cherokee. They were often called the 5 civilized tribes, mostly because they had adopted many American customs, things like settled farming, written constitutions, that sort of thing. But in the end, none of that mattered. Over a decade, they were systematically uprooted and marched west. And the human cost of this policy was just devastating. The most infamous example, of course, is the Cherokee removal in 1838. It became known as the Trail of Tears. On that brutal, forced march, an estimated 4,000 people died. 4,000 men, women, and children, nearly a quarter of their entire nation, gone. You'd think that would be enough trauma, but decades later, another massive collision: the American Civil War. The U.S. pulled its troops out of the territory, leaving the tribes completely exposed. Feeling abandoned by the Union, many signed treaties with the Confederacy. Well, after the war, the U.S. government used that as an excuse to punish them, forcing them into new treaties that stripped away the entire western half of their land, and that land became known as the unassigned lands. The creation of those unassigned lands basically lit a fuse for the next great collision. You have this immense pressure building from white settlers who saw this empty land as their big chance. And that ambition clashed directly with the original promise that Indian territory would be a permanent home for Native nations. And this pressure really came from 2 famous groups. First, you had the boomers. These were the loud ones, the lobbyists and agitators who were constantly campaigning for the government to open up the land. But then you had the Sooners. These were the people who just wouldn't wait. They snuck across the border early, sooner than they were allowed, to illegally stake out the best pieces of land for themselves. All that pressure finally led to this, the Land Run of 1889. It was an event totally unlike anything else in American history. Just try to picture it. 50,000 people lined up on a border. At high noon, a signal fires, and it's just pure, unfiltered chaos. A mad dash of horses and wagons, all racing to claim a plot of land. Entire cities, like Oklahoma City and Guthrie, literally popped into existence in a single afternoon. Okay, so once the dust from the land run kind of settles, you've got this new political reality. You have Oklahoma Territory in the west, full of white settlers, and you still have Indian Territory in the east. The final collision was inevitable. How do these two very different places become one single state? Two completely different visions went head-to-head. Leaders of the 5 tribes in Indian Territory proposed creating their own state. It would be called the State of Sequoia, and it would have been the first state with a Native American majority. The other vision, the one favored by Washington, D.C., was to just merge the two territories into one big state. The residents of Indian Territory actually voted overwhelmingly to create the state of Sequoia. They drafted a whole constitution, they sent it to Congress, but it was flatly rejected. Instead, Congress passed the Oklahoma Enabling Act, which killed the dream of a native-led state and paved the way for the merger. And so, after all that, after decades of removal, war, land runs, and political fights, on November 16, 1907, Oklahoma officially joined the Union as the 46th state. But becoming a state didn't exactly bring peace and quiet. The early 20th century in Oklahoma was a period of the most shocking extremes you can imagine. It was a violent collision of unimaginable wealth, horrific racial violence, and a devastating ecological disaster. First up was the boom. Massive oil fields were discovered, and black gold just started gushing from the ground, making Oklahoma a global powerhouse in oil production. The numbers are just mind-boggling. 1.8 times billion barrels of oil in the 1920s alone. This created instant millionaires and fueled explosive growth in cities like Tulsa. But all that new wealth existed alongside this deep, simmering racism. And in 1921, that tension exploded into one of the absolute worst acts of racial violence in American history. A white mob descended on the prosperous black neighborhood of Greenwood in Tulsa, a place so successful it was called Black Wall Street. They burned 35 city blocks to the ground and murdered an estimated 300 people. And then, just as the state was grappling with that, another collision came, this time with nature itself. Years of aggressive farming practices combined with a severe drought turned the rich topsoil into dust. The result was the Dust Bowl. Huge dust storms, they called them black blizzards, literally blotted out the sun. It destroyed farms, ruined lives, and forced this massive exodus of desperate farmers who would forever be known as Okies. So, out of the ashes of the Dust Bowl, and from the deep trauma of its early years, Oklahoma began this long, slow process of recovery and reinvention, a story that's really still being written today. The state became an early and important battleground for civil rights. Activists like the incredible Clara Luper led sit-ins in Oklahoma City years before the movement really captured national attention. It endured an unimaginable tragedy with the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, an attack that killed 168 people, but also revealed the incredible resilience of its community. And economically, it's worked hard to diversify beyond just oil, building up its aeronautical and tech sectors to escape that boom and bust cycle. Which brings us all the way back to that first question. Oklahoma's history is a story of survival, from the native nations who rebuilt their societies after being forcibly removed to the farmers who stared down the Dust Bowl and survived. The state's identity seems to have been forged in its ability to withstand one collision after another. So what does it mean to be an Okie today? Maybe it means being a survivor, a symbol of a unique kind of resilience, born from a deeply conflicted and complicated past. We really hope this explainer gave you a new way to think about the Sooner State. If you found this story compelling, please check out the other videos in our U.S. State Histories playlist. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Notebook Summaries for more deep dives like this one. Thanks for watching.